When Big Shaq's mom went undercover as a cleaner inside her own son's empire, nobody suspected a thing. But behind the glass doors and fake smiles, the truth was filthy: racism, greed, betrayal. What they didn't know: the woman with the mop wasn't just cleaning floors. Big Shaq's mom was collecting names. And when the mask came off, careers ended. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Lucille O'Neill stood by the window of her modest Orlando home, arms folded, watching the sun retreat behind the tall buildings her son's empire had helped shape. In those silhouettes of glass and steel, she could see echoes of the boy she once guided with late-night prayers and morning talks. But now, those same structures looked unfamiliar. Cold, towering, distant. Something had shifted. It wasn't just the architecture. It was the air inside those offices, the tone of the voices on the other end of Shaquille's late-night calls, and the names that no longer showed up on company event lists. Good people, loyal people, gone without a trace. Lucille wasn't one for corporate politics. She didn't pretend to understand boardroom tension or market volatility, but she knew people. She could read rooms, eyes, silences, and lately she'd been reading pain between the lines of her son's carefully chosen words. He still smiled in public, still gave motivational talks, and cut ribbons at community centers. But in private, the warmth in his voice had cooled. He was defending more than leading, bracing more than believing. It started with a letter, an anonymous one, folded and slipped into the mailbox of the community center she still volunteered at. It was handwritten, deliberate, scared. The writer claimed to be an employee at Shaq's company, someone lower in the ranks, someone who'd seen and heard too much. Racist jokes in executive lounges, pay gaps that stretched along color lines, talented black employees pushed to the margins, reassigned, or restructured out. The writer didn't want revenge. They wanted help. Hope. Lucille sat with that letter for a whole day, then another, then a week. She didn't show it to her son. Not yet. She needed to know more. And so quietly, deliberately, she made a call to an old friend who ran a custodial staffing agency. Within days she had a uniform, a schedule, and a badge name: Louise. She stepped into O'Neill Enterprises, not as Shaq's mother, but as a night shift custodian. Nobody looked twice. That in itself said enough. For the first week she moved silently, cleaned break rooms, emptied trash bins, wiped away the fingerprints from glass doors, and the occasional smudge of forgotten lipstick on the edge of coffee mugs. But she didn't miss the details. How interns avoided the executive floor, unless summoned. How black and brown employees huddled close together, speaking in low tones, eyes darting to security cameras. How the laughter in the white collars lounge turned sharp and sudden when someone walked in. One Thursday evening, just past 9 p.m., she paused outside conference room B. Inside, the door slightly ajar, she overheard a conversation not meant for ears like hers. He's too distracted with charity crap to notice what's going on in his own house. Let him stay distracted. We're the ones who actually know how to run things. And if his mother's always praying, maybe she should pray for the damn budget instead. They laughed. The sound stuck to Lucille's ribs, like cold tar. Not just because it was cruel, but because it came from people her son trusted. Executives with smiles sharp enough to cut diamonds and hands, always ready for a photo op. These weren't strangers. These were the same people who had stood beside Shaq at press conferences, who had toasted champagne at company galas, who had taken credit when the company went public. And Shaquille had no idea. Lucille didn't confront them. She didn't storm in or rattle chairs. She kept mopping. She kept listening. She became the shadow inside the machine, and what she heard, night after night, layered itself into a grim mosaic. Hiring freezes on departments run by minorities. Promotions handed off over dinner meetings, never announced to HR. A culture of fear disguised as efficiency. One night, she found Tasha in tears in the women's restroom. A young analyst. Sharp, focused, ambitious. Tasha had once told Shaq during an elevator ride that she wanted to lead a department one day. He'd smiled and said, "I'll see you at the top." But Tasha had just been told she was being transferred to a non-operational division. No notice. No reasoning. "They say it's restructuring," she sniffled. "But my numbers were solid. I led the project that saved them 6 figures. And now I'm in charge of a team that doesn't exist." Lucille handed her a tissue, her grip steady. "Don't you let them rewrite your worth. not even in small print. By the third week, Lucille had filled a worn leather journal with notes, names, times, places. She didn't write conclusions. She wrote facts, patterns, truths. She wasn't collecting gossip. She was building a case. Still, she struggled with how to tell Shaq. How do you tell your son that the house he built has termites in the walls? The opportunity came unexpectedly. A quiet Sunday dinner. Just the two of them. No headlines, no bodyguards, no advisors. Just family. He looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually. Like someone carrying 1,000 conversations he couldn't finish. Lucille watched him for a while before she spoke. You remember when you were 10, and that coach benched you without reason? He nodded. Said I had an attitude. But he really didn't like that you were taller than his son. Remember how angry you were? He chuckled faintly. I almost quit. But you didn't, she said. Because you saw the game bigger than him. That's what you need to do now. Shaq looked up from his plate. What are you talking about, Ma? She pulled out the journal, laid it gently on the table between them. You got a rot in your house, baby. And it's time to fumigate. His face went still. Not defensive, focused. He flipped through the pages slowly, eyes darkening, breath deepening. When he reached the end, he closed the journal, not with rage, but with resolve. Who gave you this? I did, she said softly. I wore the uniform. I saw it all. A long silence followed. Then he smiled, but not the kind the cameras knew. This was the quiet smile of a man reminded of his roots. Let's clean house, he said. Lucille nodded, not in triumph, but in readiness. Within days, things began to shift. Not with explosions or headlines, but with quiet removals, silent audits, closed-door interviews, led by external investigators, HR policies, rewritten, new faces brought in from the community, whistleblower protections established. The employees noticed. The laughter returned to certain hallways. Tasha got a promotion, this time with ceremony. A small plaque was installed in the main lobby that read, Integrity is not a policy, it's a legacy. Lucille returned the uniform, but she didn't leave the building. She joined the board, not in name only, but in function. At the next town hall, Shaq took the stage. He didn't talk about stocks or partnerships. He talked about culture, about listening, about cleaning not just the surface, but the soul of a company. He didn't mention his mother. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room already knew whose fingerprints were on the restoration. And Lucille, sitting in the front row, didn't smile for the cameras. She just watched her son stand tall again, not because of the empire he built, but because he dared to rebuild it right. The first time Lucille O'Neill, now Ms. Lou, pushed her cleaning cart across the marble floor of O'Neill Enterprises. Her footsteps echoed with quiet certainty. She'd tied her hair into a tight bun, wore no makeup, and moved like someone used to being overlooked. The gray uniform sagged slightly on her frame, the stitched-on name tag already fraying at the corners. No one looked twice, and that, she realized, was the greatest advantage of all. The service entrance was not designed for pride. The narrow hallway leading in from the loading dock smelled faintly of bleach and fried food. She passed young temp workers glued to their phones, managers barking into headsets, and a receptionist who waved her through without looking up. This was a building full of people on a mission, or so they thought. Lucille had one too, only hers wasn't on a quarterly slide deck. From the outside, O'Neill Enterprises was a symbol of innovation and inclusivity. A corporate giant shaped by Shaquille's image of strength, wisdom, and giving back. But from inside, Lucille began to notice the quiet fractures. And once you started seeing cracks, it was hard to unsee them. Her job was simple on paper. Clean the executive floor from 7 p.m. to midnight. Restock supplies, sanitize bathrooms, empty the trash. But Lucille had other priorities. She studied movement patterns. Who stayed late? Who whispered in glass-walled offices long after others left? She memorized the names on office doors, the ones with framed degrees and championship photos, and watched how they interacted with the world around them, or didn't. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not just the hush of after-hours office life, but a stifling loaded quiet, like something left unsaid too long. She cleaned around desks where people looked exhausted, not from work but from navigating invisible walls. She saw how certain voices dimmed when they passed corner offices, how meetings shifted their tone depending on who entered last. There was no overt chaos, No explosions, just an undercurrent. Cold, calculated. One night she found an internal memo left open on a computer. It wasn't even meant for her floor, just an accidental oversight. The subject line read, Reorg Phase 3, Personnel Optimization. Innocuous corporate language. But the content chilled her. Names, roles, and risk factors, categorized by ambiguous markers. Low leadership ceiling. Cultural resistance. Underdeveloped alignment. Lucille didn't need an MBA to decode it. These were people being prepped for elimination under a corporate euphemism. And as she read down the list, she saw the pattern. Familiar surnames. Familiar skin tone. Her first instinct was to confront someone. But that wouldn't serve the mission. The truth wasn't in a single memo. It was in the accumulation. The story layered itself across desks, conversations, coffee cups, and glances. And Lucille, with her mop in hand, and eyes wide open, gathered it all. Late on a Wednesday night, she passed by a conference room, where two senior managers, Carter and Jules, were reviewing reports on a digital whiteboard. They didn't see her. That was the thing about cleaning staff. They were invisible, disposable, and they talked like no one else was in the room. You saw the HR review, her loyalties with the community programs, not the firm's trajectory. She keeps going back to that old Shaq quote about building from the inside. She doesn't understand we're trying to scale beyond his shadow. What about her numbers? Good, but not exceptional. She's replaceable. Lucille paused, gripping the mop handle tighter. They were talking about Janelle, an operations director who'd been with the company since its grassroots days. A woman Lucille had known for years. A woman who had built the logistics backbone of the company when it was still a handful of staff in a rented building. Replaceable. The word hung in the air like smoke. The deeper she went, the more Lucille saw how far the rot had spread. It wasn't personal, they would say. It was business. But Lucille had lived long enough to know when business was used to disguise bias. She saw how mentorship programs were being scaled back quietly, how diversity initiative budgets had been halved, how every polished press release masked a retreat from the company's original values. And worst of all, Shaquille didn't know. One evening, Lucille found herself cleaning the corridor outside the company's media studio. The monitor on the wall played a highlight reel on loop. Shaq visiting a school, shaking hands with local leaders, hosting a panel on equity in tech. Inside, two marketing associates were editing footage. Trim the part where he talks about internal culture too heavy. What about the employee roundtable quote? Cut it. No one wants to see grievances. Keep the community work. That plays better. Lucille leaned against the cart. So even his own words were being reshaped. But not everyone was blind. In the employee lounge, she often caught glimpses of quiet resistance. A new hire, Marcus, discreetly guiding interns toward better resources. An older administrative assistant who left anonymous notes on her desk about old hiring protocols being scrapped. A security guard named Elroy, who once whispered, "You don't look like no regular janitor, ma'am," before giving her a respectful nod. It was Elroy who tipped her off about the upcoming board retreat. A private off-site weekend meeting, just the core team. No PR, no minutes. That's when the biggest decisions were made, he said. When new directions were cemented, if changes were coming, they'd be formalized there. Lucille knew she couldn't get inside that meeting. But she didn't need to. She just needed to ensure that Shaq walked into it armed with more than trust. She spent the next 3 nights assembling a report. Not dramatic, not inflammatory. Just facts, quotes, timelines, a pattern. She kept it short, 12 pages, plus supporting documents. She printed 3 copies, and sealed them in labeled folders. What you built. What's at risk. What you still can save. She left one in Shaq's private office, tucked beneath a signed basketball he kept from his rookie year. The second she placed in Janelle's inbox. The third she mailed anonymously to his longtime mentor, Coach Reynolds. With a handwritten note. Sometimes the best plays happen off the court. Then she clocked out. The next morning, buzz rippled through the building. Executives were pulled from meetings. Emails were recalled. A closed-door discussion began just before noon, and by evening, 4 senior-level staff were placed on temporary leave. An internal audit was ordered. Compliance teams activated. Lucille didn't stick around to watch the fallout. Her mission wasn't about spectacle. It was about impact. That Friday, as she emptied the trash in the HR office, she overheard someone murmur, "Who's this Ms. Liu? I've never seen her on payroll." Lucille smiled quietly to herself. She hadn't expected a nameplate or a spotlight. She just wanted her son's legacy back on track. On her last night of work, she paused by the executive floor windows, looking out at the city skyline. The buildings stood tall and gleaming, reflecting 1,000 stories in their windows. But Lucille wasn't looking at steel or glass. She was looking at potential, at course correction, at how even a kinting needed its floors cleaned from time to time, not just with water and soap, but with truth. She took off her gloves, folded the uniform, left it neatly in the janitor's closet. No fanfare, just the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled. Because sometimes to change the world, you don't need a microphone or a stage. Sometimes, you just need a mop, a name no one recognizes, and a heart that refuses to let silence win. Lucille moved through the corridors of O'Neill Enterprises with the grace of someone who knew the power of silence. As Ms. Liu, she wore the uniform like armor, gray, utilitarian, anonymous. It gave her access without questions, a pass into spaces where truth often slouched behind closed doors. The company was a temple of glass and light by day, all sleek surfaces and curated smiles, but by night, in the hush of fluorescent shadows, it revealed something else, what people acted like when they thought no one was watching. The young employees passed her like wind, fast, preoccupied, phones glued to their palms, their glances skimmed over her without landing, as if her presence were part of the furniture. She didn't take it personally. That was the nature of her cover. But she noted the disconnection, the way they stiffened around senior staff, the way they carried tension in their shoulders, the way their joy, where it existed, was fragile. Some of them showed kindness in small, unconscious gestures, a nod here, a smile there, but it faded quickly, especially when the higher-ups were near. The managers walked differently. They moved in packs, sharp suits and sharper tongues, rarely looking back. If they held doors open, it was for people who could benefit their rise. If they spoke to someone beneath them, it was clipped, calculated, dismissive. Lucille took it all in, like a forensic reader scanning behavior instead of files. One afternoon, just before her shift began, she paused by the lower-level break room and heard a young black intern, Kayla, talking to a coworker. The tone was hushed, cautious. I swear, every time I speak in a meeting, they either ignore it or repeat what I said later like it's their idea. I tried to bring it up once, and they told me I was reading too much into things. Lucille stayed out of sight, but the words stayed with her. That same night, she witnessed the director of partnerships spill his coffee deliberately, twice, then bark at her to earn that paycheck. His smirk was slow, almost amused, as if he were testing how far he could go. Lucille, ever composed, cleaned the spill without a word, but inside she filed it away, not as an isolated incident, but as evidence. Later, she heard whispers near the elevator. Two junior executives laughing at the new inclusion initiative Shaq had championed. Lip service, one said. Nobody actually cares. Let them feel seen, then move them out. The other chuckled. He still thinks this place is a community center. It was always like that. Veneer overwrought. Lucille wasn't shocked. She was focused. Every interaction revealed another crack in the foundation. There was one moment that stood out more than most. She was cleaning the executive floor hallway when she passed a conference room lit but empty. Papers had been left on the table, scattered across an open folder. It was a performance evaluation chart. Names, rankings, a comment column. Lucille recognized some of the names, people she'd observed. Some were tagged culture risk, others marked for realignment. None of the labels were about performance. They were about compliance, about how well someone played the political game. A few minutes later, the head of HR, Peterson, walked in, didn't acknowledge her presence, and began talking into his phone. Yeah, we'll move on her quietly. No need for noise. Offer the severance and get the NDA signed before Friday. If she pushes back, cite performance, but don't get legal involved unless she does. Lucille stayed bent over her cart, pretending to check supplies, her heart hammering. She'd expected systemic issues, not surgical removals. This was something deeper, colder. At times she wondered how Shaq hadn't seen it. But she realized now, he saw the outputs, the polished reports, the PR gloss. They curated what he saw. Shielded him from the rot. Maybe even convinced him this was growth, progress, evolution. But Lucille had always known that a clean floor didn't mean a clean heart. She watched how power moved, like smoke through cracks and crevices, always invisible to those who weren't breathing it in. The more she listened, the more she realized the company didn't just have a problem with diversity or equity, it had a problem with humanity. People were cogs here. Useful, replaceable, disposable. She began to notice other janitors, other staff, equally invisible, old men with tired eyes, women who walked with stiff knees and tight mouths. None of them talked much. Lucille started small conversations where she could. Most were hesitant, but a few opened up. "You're new," said one woman, Rosa, during a break. "You still believe in fixing things?" Lucille gave a soft smile. "I believe in starting fires where the mold grows." Rosa blinked, then nodded slowly. "Then be careful. This place doesn't like light in the dark corners." There was another moment, even more chilling, that defined the turning point of her mission. One of the senior executives' Lance passed her in the hall. Tall, pale, always reeking of cologne and confidence. He leaned in as he passed, muttered under his breath, "You people are always so quiet when you're useful." Lucille didn't flinch, didn't break stride, but something inside her settled into place. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. This wasn't about a toxic culture anymore. It was about infection, an infection being tolerated, hidden, even protected, and if left unchecked, it would destroy everything her son believed he was building. That night, she returned to her small on-site locker and retrieved her journal. The entries had grown thick, pages filled with quotes, timestamps, references. But now she began writing something different, not just observations, but a strategy. She began to cross-reference names, chart conversations, map influence, who enabled whom, who benefited when others fell. It was a web, and she was finally starting to see its shape. One surprising ally emerged in the form of a receptionist named Omar. Quiet, sharp-eyed, and always watching. One evening, after everyone had left, he handed her a folder without a word. Inside were printouts, emails, internal messages not meant for public viewing, discussions about cutting community partnerships, budget reallocations, even mocking comments about Shaq's speeches being PR fluff. "Why give this to me?" she asked him. "Because," he said, "you're the only one who sees it all." Trust came in strange packages, but Lucille welcomed it. She added his folder to her growing collection. The case was no longer anecdotal. It was structural. She didn't plan to expose anyone with a press conference. She wasn't here to burn it down. She wanted something harder. A return. A reckoning. A reckoning that could restore the place to its founding values, not by force but by truth. But she knew time was short. The annual leadership summit was 2 weeks away. It would be the perfect place for the guilty to cement their control. Policy decisions, staff reshuffles, strategic pivots. And Shaq, trusting as always, would walk into that room, expecting vision. He'd find manipulation. Unless someone turned on the lights, Lucille began to prepare. She organized her notes, typed them cleanly, grouped her evidence under headers: ethical breaches, structural bias, cultural erosion, employee displacement. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't editorialize, just facts, cold and crisp. In the days that followed, some things began to shift. Employees started whispering about sudden interviews being conducted quietly, audits appearing in unexpected departments, HR reviewing exit packages, with a different tone. No one knew why. Lucille kept her head down, cleaned the glass that no longer felt so transparent, wiped the floors that still held too many secrets. She knew her time as Ms. Liu was almost up. But before she clocked out for the last time, she left one final envelope in the conference room, where Shaq would soon meet with his top executives. On the outside it said, "You once told me we don't build with money, we build with people. Let's build again, Mom." And inside, there was a sharp thud, followed by the unmistakable clatter of plastic against tile. Then a voice, loud and sharp enough to slice through the stillness. "Are you blind? Do you even know how to hold a bottle?" Lucille turned the corner just in time to see Anna, a fellow janitor, mid-40s, petite, shoulders curled inward, fumbling to clean up a splash of blue disinfectant, now streaked across the polished shoes of Lance Cartwright, Senior VP of Strategic Operations. His lips curled in disgust as he shook his foot like he was flicking off something vile. Anna's hands trembled as she dabbed at his shoes with paper towels from her cart. I'm so sorry, sir. It slipped. I didn't mean. Lance raised his voice again, making sure everyone in the vicinity heard. Maybe if you people spent more time learning the job and less time chatting in Spanish, things wouldn't get spilled. Lucille felt her jaw tighten, her fists curled, unnoticed, beneath the sleeves of her uniform. Around them, two younger executives walked past, eyes pointedly, averted. Not a single one paused, not a single one intervened. Anna's eyes stayed on the floor, her breath quickened, shoulders shaking as she stood in place, neither defending herself nor daring to leave. Lucille watched the collapse happen in real time, the way dignity drained from someone not because of a single mistake, but because of how quickly the room allowed them to become invisible. Not just unseen, dismissed, diminished. She stepped closer, not rushing, but deliberate. Lance was already walking away, muttering curses under his breath. Lucille didn't stop him. Not yet. Her attention stayed on Anna, who was still frozen, clutching the empty bottle, like a weapon turned against her. Lucille bent down, gently took the paper towels from Anna's hand, and began wiping the floor with calm precision. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. In that moment, her quiet was louder than any apology. Anna tried to speak. It was my fault. Lucille cut her off softly. It wasn't your fault. It was his choice. The words hung there. Strange, because no one ever named it like that. Not here. Not this bluntly. Anna blinked back tears. If I report him, nothing will happen. They'll just say I'm overreacting. Lucille paused, met her eyes. Then we make sure someone listens. That night she didn't write in her usual notebook. She recorded a voice memo. Her tone measured, clear, detailed. She described the incident, noted the time, location, names of everyone who passed by, and didn't speak. She didn't dramatize it. She just spoke the truth, and when she finished, she emailed the file to a secure address she'd set up weeks earlier. The subject line was simple: character audit, Cartwright. Lucille knew it wouldn't be the last story like Anna's. In fact, it wasn't even the worst. Over the next week, more patterns emerged. Small slights that built up into erosion. A designer named Darnell, who was told he was too urban for client meetings. A finance analyst, named Priya, who was repeatedly interrupted during strategy calls by her junior male counterpart. A mailroom supervisor, Jerome, who had submitted a project proposal months ago, one that had mysteriously reappeared with another name attached, presented at a leadership summit without acknowledgement. Lucille saw it all. But more than that, she saw the effects. The bruises weren't on skin. They were in posture. In forced smiles. In deflated laughs during after hours. In the slow retreat of good people from meetings. They once led with passion. She began meeting Anna during their break times. At first it was just quiet companionship. Two women sitting side by side, sharing tea from a thermos and unspoken stories through glances. But slowly, Anna began to talk. I used to love working here, she said one night, watching the moonlight bend through the high windows. My mother used to clean banks. She always said, the floor you clean today might be the floor your child runs tomorrow. I believed that here. Now I just try to avoid being noticed. Lucille nodded, letting the words settle. There's a cost to being invisible. But there's power in watching what others miss. That same night, Lucille found herself replaying Anna's incident over and over. Not just the words, but the silence around it. She began making a list, not of those who spoke cruelly, but of those who watched and said nothing, who held titles, who smiled in press photos beside Shaq, who performed allyship in front of cameras but failed it behind closed doors. She called it the wall of quiet men, because sometimes the danger isn't the one who lashes out, it's the ones who let him. It wasn't just executives, middle managers, project leads, department heads. They turned away more often than they stepped in. Not because they were evil, but because accountability was inconvenient. Speaking up risked position, risked comfort. Lucille began testing a theory. She left a copy of a diversity pledge, one of Shaq's earliest company initiatives, in the break room, attached to the coffee machine. The next day it was gone. 2 days later it reappeared, ripped in half, taped to the trash bin. Another test. She quietly posted an anonymous quote from Anna's experience on the bulletin board outside HR. Not identifying names, just words. I said sorry, but he wanted me to disappear. Within hours it had been taken down, replaced with a standard employee wellness poster. These weren't just acts of erasure. They were acts of control. Lucille changed her approach. She began planting her story in whispers, during a pause in the elevator ride, while refilling supply cabinets, in passing comments, always vague but truthful. They say Ms. Lu knows more than she lets on. Did you hear someone's tracking how HR handles complaints? I heard someone sent a file to the board. Real receipts. The rumors spread like ink in water. People became cautious, paranoid. But they also became curious. Omar, the receptionist, slipped her a USB drive one night. It logs, he said. Access records. There's stuff in here I wasn't supposed to see. Janelle, the operations director who'd nearly been pushed out, began asking questions in meetings, asking why her proposals were being redirected, asking who was authorizing resource cuts to community teams. And then, one morning, Anna wasn't at work. No notice, no warning, just gone. Lucille checked with Rosa. Nothing. Asked Omar. Nothing. She even walked the perimeter of the building, as if Anna might somehow be waiting outside. The absence felt surgical. That night, Lucille sat in the janitor's closet for a full hour, the uniform still clinging to her skin. She didn't cry, but she sat very still, because she knew what had happened. Not in technical terms, not in emails or memos, but in instinct. They silenced her. And yet, it made the path ahead clearer. Lucille returned to her cart, but now she moved with urgency. She retrieved her journal. The names in it were no longer just notes. They were charges. She crafted a final report, not to be sent blindly, but delivered with timing. The leadership summit was 4 days away. She wouldn't just hand it over. She would walk into the lion's den. Because, while Anna may have been pushed into silence, Lucille still had a voice, and she was going to use it. It happened in the lounge adjacent to the executive boardroom, a place she cleaned daily. Most employees had long since learned to avoid it, unless summoned. Lucille had noticed how the air in that room always felt colder. Today it carried something sharper. She was wiping down the glass-topped table, a soft hum under her breath, when she heard the click of expensive shoes on tile. Lance Cartwright. Of course. He moved like he owned oxygen. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. That was the power in her role. Pretend not to hear what was meant to wound. He stood by the water cooler, filling a clear glass with ice and tap. Lucille could sense him watching her. Though he said nothing, she continued working, back turned. Then came the shift in the air, slight, anticipatory. Her instincts screamed, but her body held. The splash was sudden. Freezing water soaked her scalp, rushed down her neck, drenched the front of her uniform. The cold took her breath for half a second, but she didn't move, didn't gasp, didn't even blink. The silence that followed was deeper than rage. Lance didn't speak, didn't laugh. He just set the empty glass down on the counter, wiped his fingers on a napkin, and walked out. His message had been simple: you are beneath me. You are nothing. Lucille stood still, water dripping to the tile floor. The chill clawed at her bones, but her eyes burned with clarity. Not humiliation, resolve. She slowly placed her cloth on the table, turned off the spray bottle, and walked out of the lounge without a word. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. She made her way to the janitor's closet, pulled off the soaked uniform, and wrapped herself in a spare from her backup locker. As she buttoned it, hands steady, she looked into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, older, weathered, but unbroken. Something solid had taken root in her chest. This wasn't about Lance. Not anymore. This was about the machine that had let him believe he could get away with it. This was about a system that erased the dignity of people who kept the building running, who were invisible until something needed to be blamed, or punished. She opened her notebook that night, and didn't write notes. She wrote a speech. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't polished. It was truth, distilled and raw. She wrote about Anna, about the silence of those who watched, about the systemic rot that had eaten through the company's soul, while Shaq smiled for cameras and cut ribbons at charity events. She wrote about the ghosts in the hallways, the employees gone not by choice but by design, and she ended with a promise: change will come, whether you're ready or not. The next morning, she requested a meeting with HR, not as Ms. Lu, the janitor, but under her real name, Lucille O'Neill. Her badge no longer gave her access to the upper floors, but her name still did. At first the receptionist didn't connect the dots, But by the time she was seated in the HR director's office, flanked by 2 compliance officers and 1 visibly panicked assistant, her presence was no longer deniable. She didn't yell, didn't accuse. She slid a folder across the table, chronological documentation of incidents, audio clips, printed memos, anonymous testimonies, even time-stamped video stills from security footage that Omar had helped her pull. The contents of the folder didn't scream. They exposed. The HR director skimmed the pages with growing dread. "Where did you get all of this?" Lucille met his gaze. "By being invisible long enough to see everything you didn't." They tried to delay, said they needed time to review, but she knew the summit was in 2 days, and by then, it would be too late. So she made a decision. She called her son. Shaq didn't answer on the first ring, or the second, but on the third his voice came through, familiar and heavy with the usual mix of leadership and weariness. "Ma, everything okay?" She hesitated, then said, "We need to talk. Before your summit, before they rewrite your company in ink." He didn't ask questions, just said, "Tell me where." They met at an old diner they used to visit when he was in high school. The kind of place where the coffee came thick and the waitresses called you sugar. Lucille slid into the booth across from him, folder in hand. He could see the weight in her eyes before she even spoke. She handed him the documentation, watched as he flipped through it slowly. His expression didn't change, but his breathing did. His jaw locked, shoulders squared. He paused only once, when he saw the photo of Anna with her arm twisted, as she scrubbed a corner, pain etched in her posture. "Is this still happening?" he asked, voice low. Lucille nodded. "Yesterday, one of your VPs dumped a glass of water on me, just to prove he could." Shaq's hands curled into fists on the table, then relaxed. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "And you didn't say anything?" "I did," she said. "Right now." He looked up, eyes glassy with a storm he was trying to control. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because the truth needed to be seen, not told. You needed to feel what's been buried under those reports and PR campaigns. I couldn't hand you the truth. You had to be ready to accept it." He exhaled slowly, nodded. "I'm ready." She didn't ask for promises. She didn't tell him what to do. She trusted him to remember who he was. At the summit 2 days later, the executives gathered as always, suits pristine, presentations loaded with buzzwords, plans for expansion, profit forecasts, rebranding strategies. Lance was there too, relaxed, smug, already bragging to colleagues about the new direction the company would take. He didn't notice when Shaq walked in early, alone, without the usual entourage. Lucille didn't attend the summit. She didn't need to. Her voice was already in the room. Shaq began the meeting, not with a forecast, but with a file. The same one Lucille had given him. "This company bears my name," he said, "but lately, it hasn't reflected my values. So we're making changes. Today," he went name by name, incident by incident, and then he paused at Lance's. "This man poured cold water on a woman I love. Not because she made a mistake, but because he thought she was beneath him." Gasps rippled through the room. Lance opened his mouth, but no sound came. Shaq continued. "She didn't flinch. But I will not stay silent." By the end of that summit, 2 executives were dismissed. 3 department heads were placed on administrative review. A new whistleblower division was announced. Mandatory cultural training wasn't just scheduled. It was enforced. And for the first time in years, someone from the janitorial staff was invited to join the internal ethics board. Lucille watched it unfold from a distance. No cameras, no fanfare, just impact. The next week she returned to the building, not as Ms. Liu, not as a mother in hiding, but as a guest speaker for the new employee onboarding seminar. She walked to the front of the room, looked out at a sea of nervous, eager faces, and said, "You may never own this building, but you have a right to be seen in it. And if anyone tells you otherwise, know this truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone who refuses to dim." No applause, just stillness. Then slowly, hands began to rise in the room, not in celebration, but in readiness. Lucille had never seen herself as a spy. But then again, she had never seen a mop as a weapon before either. For weeks now, she'd been operating in the space between silence and action, collecting truth in slivers, recording it in ink, remembering it in glances. But the deeper she moved into the belly of O'Neill Enterprises, the more she realized this wasn't just about culture or cruelty. This was a coup, And they weren't just stripping dignity from the people below. They were sharpening knives for the one at the top. Shaquille, her son. They wanted to erase him quietly. With smiles, handshakes, paperwork, and whispers behind glass doors. But they didn't know she'd been listening. And now she was preparing her final move. She became surgical in her planning, deliberate. Every shift had a secondary purpose. Her cart, now retrofitted with compartments she'd designed herself, carried more than disinfectant and rags. Nestled behind the paper towel refills, and under the ammonia bottle was a recorder. Small, discreet, voice-activated. She had 3 of them, each with different ranges, different placements. One in the executive break room behind the vent, another tucked behind the massive fake ficus near the boardroom door. The last, her favorite, nested inside a hollowed-out coffee tin that sat unnoticed on the lounge counter. She gave them names. Observation, 1, 2, and 3. Not because she was trying to be dramatic, because to her this was war. And in war, precision mattered. The recordings began to stack quickly. At first they were the usual snide jokes. Coded language, casual dismissal of employee concerns. But as the summit approached and pressure built behind the scenes, the conversations grew darker, more strategic, more conspiratorial. One evening, she caught a conversation between 2 managers discussing budget reallocations. If we cut funding to the community initiatives this quarter, we can quietly fold that division next year. No one's paying attention to the metrics anyway. Shaq's pet projects? He'll notice, only if we let him. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came on a Thursday night, raining outside, the building nearly empty. Lucille had been refilling a soap dispenser in the executive lounge bathroom. When she noticed the light in the adjacent boardroom was still on, she paused, waited, slipped back into the corridor, and leaned just enough to see the outlines of 4 men sitting inside, their voices low but distinct. Lance Cartwright, HR Director Peterson, Finance Chief Warren, Legal Counsel Daniel Cho. Her recorder, tucked behind the thermostat just outside the boardroom, captured everything. "They're going to expect the usual fiscal review," Peterson said. "We give them the report with padded growth, redirect funds through the new shell vendor, and by Q2 we've moved $8 million out clean." Warren chimed in. "The community fund is the cover. No one tracks the real expenditures down there. Not even Shaq. He trusts too many people." "And what about the board?" Cho asked. "You want to edge Shaq out? You need the numbers. You need the leverage." "We'll show instability," Lance said flatly. "That's the angle. We've been setting it up for months. Cutbacks disguised as streamlining. Turnover spun as market pressure. Once the board sees he's losing control, we suggest transition. Gentle. Strategic. Make it sound like he's stepping down to focus on philanthropy." The room was quiet for a beat. Then Cho added, "And if he resists?" "He won't," Lance said. "He won't want the press." Lucille felt her knees lock. They weren't just undermining her son. They were repurposing his legacy, turning his ideals into tools of deception. Everything he'd built, his name, his vision, his sacrifices, packaged for exploitation. And the most devastating part, he had no idea, because he'd trusted them. She retrieved the recorder an hour later, heart pounding, hands steady. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in the janitor's lounge, a space she rarely used, and listened to the entire recording 3 times. Then she backed it up twice, sent 1 copy to her personal encrypted drive, another to Omar. She stared at the ceiling after that, the buzz of the old vending machine the only sound. They were going to steal her son's soul and call it strategy. Not anymore. The next morning she called an old friend, Teresa Marks, an investigative reporter turned nonprofit director. Trusted, sharp, known for her integrity. Lucille met her at a coffee shop on the edge of the city. "No press. No pretext." "I'm not asking for an article," Lucille said, sliding the flash drive across the table. "I'm asking for a lifeline. Just in case." Teresa listened, brows furrowed, then nodded. "I won't do anything unless it becomes necessary. But if it does, they won't know what hit them." By Friday, Lucille had assembled what she called the dossier, a binder packed with printouts of all her evidence. Documents, quotes, call logs, timestamps, photographs, testimony excerpts. At the very back, the full transcript of the secret meeting. It was color-coded, footnoted, dated. She placed it in a box with a letter addressed to her son. A letter she wrote, not as a whistleblower, or even as a janitor, but as his mother. In it she reminded him of who he was. of who they had always been. "You weren't born to guard gates," she wrote. "You were born to break them open." Then she waited. Saturday morning, hours before the leadership summit was to begin, she slipped into the building for her final act. Not with a mop, not in a uniform, in her Sunday best. Crisp, confident, present. Security tried to stop her at the entrance. She gave them her name. 5 minutes later, Shaquille O'Neal himself appeared in the lobby. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer platitudes. He just opened his arms. Lucille held him for a second longer than usual, then whispered, "They planned to take it all." "I know," he said. "I heard the tape. What are you going to do?" Shaq stepped back, jaw tight. "Remind them whose house this is." As executives filtered into the summit hall, there was a shift in atmosphere. Not fear, exactly, but tension, something unspoken in the air. Shaq took the stage earlier than expected. He didn't sit, didn't smile. He opened the box Lucille had given him, held up the binder, and said, "This company has a sickness, and we are going to treat it, publicly, painfully, and properly." The room went still. In the hours that followed, heads rolled, but quietly, no shouting, no scandal. Shaq didn't shame them. He replaced them. Lucille, seated quietly in the back, watched with no need to speak. The storm had passed, but not without flooding the lies from every corner. She didn't need applause. She had saved the soul of the house. And this time everyone saw her do it. The boardroom had never been this quiet. The room was packed. Every board member present. Senior executives in tailored suits lined one side. The legal team on standby. HR sat stiffly, trying to appear neutral. No one knew exactly why the emergency meeting had been called, only that it had come from the top. And when Shaquille O'Neal summoned a room, no one declined. Lance Cartwright entered late, adjusting his tie with the smug, rehearsed ease of a man who still believed the system belonged to him. He gave Warren and Peterson a knowing nod, then took his seat at the far end, closest to the projector screen. The same chair he always chose during high-stakes meetings. From there he could watch everyone's reactions, control the mood. But something felt off. Shaq stood by the windows, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. He didn't speak, didn't sit. His usual warmth was missing, replaced by a cool gravity that unsettled even those who considered themselves allies. He glanced at the door, then at his watch. And then she entered. Lucille O'Neal. No uniform. No mop. No cart. She walked in wearing a navy blue suit, pearls on her neck, hair swept up like she was heading to a courtroom, not a boardroom. She moved without hesitation, her heels echoing in deliberate rhythm across the floor. She didn't acknowledge the gasps, the wide eyes, or the sudden shuffling of chairs. She placed a binder on the table in front of her, adjusted the mic at the head of the room, and looked out at the faces that for weeks had looked right through her. Some blinked in recognition. Some swallowed hard. Others glanced at one another, silent panic starting to flicker behind carefully composed masks. She cleared her throat just once, and then she spoke. "For weeks I have cleaned these halls. Not as a guest, not as a founder's mother, but as a worker, a watcher. And what I've seen," she paused, her gaze shifting deliberately to Lance, "is rot hiding beneath polish, power corrupted by ego, and silence used as a weapon." No one moved. "I was Ms. Liu," she continued, "the woman you ignored, the one you humiliated, the one you joked about, lied in front of, schemed around, and while you thought I was nothing, just another old woman pushing a cart, I was listening, recording, documenting." Shaq stepped forward silently and placed a laptop in front of her. She nodded in thanks, plugged in the flash drive, and clicked play. The audio filled the room instantly. Lance's voice. "He won't notice. He's too busy building playgrounds and taking selfies with kids. Let him stay distracted." Warren, 8 million, clean, filtered through the outreach division. Looks like generosity on paper. Peterson. "He's losing control. We say we're supporting him while pulling the rug." Then laughter. Lucille didn't flinch. She let the full recording play. No edits, no commentary. Every minute more damning than the last. The tape ended on a quote that chilled the room. "Lance. He built the brand. We'll take the business." The room stayed frozen. Even the AC seemed to stop humming. Lance opened his mouth, but Lucille raised a hand, silencing him with a calmness more devastating than any shout. "You may explain in a moment. But first, more truth." She clicked again. Audio from the executive lounge. The moment Anna apologized over and over while Lance belittled her. The laughter that followed from others in the room. Their names attached to the timestamp logs on the screen. Then another clip. True mocking inclusion initiatives. A manager threatening to terminate whistleblowers. A private meeting where HR discussed how to package severance for maximum silence. The faces around the table drained of color. Some board members looked away. One woman muttered a quiet curse under her breath. Then Lucille closed the laptop. This company bears my son's name, but names are more than letters. They're legacy. What you've built here behind his back is not worthy of it. Shaq stepped beside her then. For the first time since the meeting began, he spoke. I didn't see it. That's on me. I trusted the wrong people, and I let them run this place like it was theirs. But this ends now. Warren tried to speak. Shaq, this can be handled internally. No, Lucille said, voice calm, unshakable. You've had years to handle it internally. All you did was bury it deeper. Lance leaned forward, a bead of sweat at his temple. You have no legal standing. Shaq stepped closer, his tone cold. She doesn't need legal standing. I do, and I've already initiated a full investigation. Your credentials have been suspended. All 4 of you are on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending legal review. The files have already been submitted to compliance and an external audit firm. A stunned silence stretched across the room. Lucille picked up her binder and looked directly at the rest of the table. The real test isn't what you do after you're caught. It's what you allowed while pretending not to see. She turned to leave but paused. For those of you who watched it happen, you have a choice now. Join us in cleaning house, or prepare to be swept out with the dust. With that, she walked out. Poised, dry-eyed, unapologetic. Shaq followed her, pausing only to say, meeting adjourned. The boardroom remained frozen long after they left. The flash drive still plugged in. The echo of Lucille's voice still thick in the air. Back in the elevator, Lucille exhaled for the first time in hours. Shaq turned to her, a soft smile breaking through his controlled facade. You just took down 4 of the highest paid people in the company. I didn't take them down, she said. They walked into a mirror. He laughed, real and warm. You always said the truth doesn't need a crowd. It just needs to be heard, she replied. Even if it's hidden in plain sight. The building didn't shake. There were no alarms, no camera crews waiting at the door, no press releases fired off in real time. But make no mistake, what happened that Monday morning at O'Neill Enterprises would ripple through every hallway, every corner office, every whispered conversation for years to come. And it all began not with a bang, but with a list. The employees arrived to find a closed-door sign outside the executive suite. Leadership in strategic session, access restricted. It wasn't unusual. Strategic sessions happened often, but this one felt different. HR reps were stationed quietly on the floor. The security team, typically invisible, was now present at every exit, their earpieces buzzing with silent instruction. Word traveled quickly, but inaccurately. No one knew the truth, not yet. In the largest conference room, the board sat already assembled. A select few senior leaders were present as well, those who had not been implicated, but whose departments would be directly affected by the next few hours. Shaquille stood at the head of the table, but it wasn't him who opened the meeting. It was Lucille. She didn't sit. She didn't pace. She stood with her back straight, eyes level, voice measured. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to shame. I'm here to return this company to the values it was built on. I've said what needed saying. Now I ask you to witness what must be done. She nodded to Shaq, who unfolded a paper with 5 names typed in bold. 4 of them instantly familiar. The 5th, a quiet shock, a legal consultant, who had enabled the cover-up with precise but unethical documentation. Shaq's voice didn't waver as he read the names aloud. No performance, no theater, just facts. Lance Cartwright, fired for breach of ethical conduct, conspiracy to defraud, and violation of fiduciary duty. Effective immediately. Martin Warren, fired for financial misconduct, falsification of reporting, and enabling fraudulent allocation of community funds. Janet Peterson, fired for obstruction of internal whistleblower protections and complicity in unethical termination practices. Daniel Cho, fired for conflict of interest, manipulation of legal reviews, and failure to report material risk to the board. And finally, Carla Dixon, Contract terminated for assisting in the destruction of internal records relevant to an active investigation. Each name landed with the weight of finality. There were no rebuttals, no pleas. They had been informed prior to the meeting, escorted from the premises, badges deactivated, emails locked. The news was being delivered to the rest of leadership, not as a debate, but as a fact. No applause followed. Only stillness. Lucille scanned the room, not with scorn, but with clarity. She let the silence stretch, not to create tension, but to allow the truth to breathe. No one could say they didn't know anymore. You thought you were protecting the company, she said, voice steady. But what you were protecting was power, image, your own positions. And in doing that, you forgot who this company was meant to serve. She looked at the younger leaders in the room, many of whom had never dared speak up. Some lowered their eyes. Others met hers, cautiously grateful. Shaq built this on community, on second chances, on seeing the overlooked. What you built in secret was the opposite. You created a culture of fear, wrapped in performance. And that ends today. She turned to the board, gave a respectful nod, and sat beside her son. Shaq took over from there, not as a CEO but as someone reclaiming a dream. The work ahead is harder than the work behind us. We're not just rebuilding a company, we're rebuilding trust. That's going to take policy changes, cultural resets, and most importantly, accountability that doesn't end with this room.
He paused. Let the words settle.
There are going to be audits, not just of finances, but of ethics, of leadership, of the systems we said we were proud of, but never actually checked. The board chair, a man who had once been a close family friend but had grown too comfortable in silence, finally spoke. What about the shareholders? Shaq looked at him, calm but firm. If our shareholders don't want a company rooted in justice, they can take their money elsewhere. We're done with pretending ethics and profit are mutually exclusive. No one responded. In the days that followed, the company didn't fall apart. It started breathing again. A statement was quietly released to staff. No grand announcement, no naming names publicly. Just an internal bulletin titled, "A New Standard Begins Today." It outlined the changes. A new ethics committee, composed of staff from all departments, janitorial to executive, anonymous reporting channels, led by third-party investigators, quarterly reviews not just for performance, but for culture, a commitment to listen to the lowest-paid employees with the same respect as the highest-paid ones. And the most unexpected shift, Lucille O'Neill would now serve as executive advisor to the board on cultural integrity. Some called it symbolic. Others saw it for what it was, a rebalancing of power. Her office was small, windowless, tucked beside HR. But people visited. Interns came to tell her what they were afraid to say aloud. Managers came to listen, not perform. Even the new CFO, brought in from outside, asked to meet with her before finalizing her first quarter's plan. Lucille never asked for authority, but she earned presence. One afternoon, Kayla, the young intern who once felt invisible, knocked on her door. She came in holding a notepad, looking nervous. I was asked to help with the company's anniversary gala, she said. They said I should consult you, on messaging. Lucille smiled, gestured to the chair across from her. Tell me what you want people to feel when they walk in. Kayla blinked, surprised. Feel? Yes. Don't give me the slogan. Give me the spine of it. Kayla paused, then said quietly, like they matter. Lucille nodded. Then that's your message. At the gala weeks later, the theme wasn't vision or excellence, or any of the usual glossed-over slogans. The theme was worth seeing. Shaq stood on stage in front of a crowd that finally felt like a reflection of the company he imagined. He didn't mention the scandal. He didn't have to. Everyone there knew what had changed, what had been shed, what had been saved. In the front row, Lucille sat beside employees who, months ago, wouldn't have been invited. She wore a navy dress with silver accents and didn't say much, just watched. Not for flaws but for growth. Because she knew something the executives never did. Consequences don't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes they walk in quietly, with a clipboard, with a tape recorder, with a mother's love wrapped in steel. The transformation wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with fireworks or splashy headlines. It moved like sunrise, slow, inevitable, warm. In the weeks following the summit, O'Neill Enterprises became something it had long forgotten how to be: honest. The deception had been carved out, The rot cleaned at the root, but what emerged wasn't just a revised corporate strategy or a new batch of executives. It was culture reborn, restored, and rooted this time in truth. Shaq walked the halls now with eyes wide open. He didn't delegate oversight to filters or filters to spin. He showed up in meetings unannounced. He ate lunch with staff who used to watch him from afar. He asked questions that made people pause, not because they were hard, but because no one had ever bothered to ask them before. How does this place feel to you? Do you see yourself here in 5 years? What would you change if it were up to you? At first, the answers were hesitant. People were still healing, still unsure if the new tone was temporary or real. But then something began to shift, not just in words but in posture. Shoulders relaxed, eyes met, voices grew steadier. The departments once marked by silence began speaking up. People who had considered leaving started staying, not out of obligation, but out of hope. Not out of fear, but pride. Lucille didn't return to the executive boardroom. She didn't need to. Her office remained small, her presence large. She moved through the building the same way she always had. Quietly, attentively, but now without disguise. And wherever she walked, people stood a little straighter, not because she demanded it, but because she reminded them that dignity doesn't belong to titles, it belongs to everyone. She kept the mop, not as a prop, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. It leaned against the wall in her office, near a window that overlooked the courtyard where employees often gathered during breaks. New benches had been added there, built by the facility staff, requested by no one, appreciated by all. They called it the listening garden, and people actually used it, to talk, to breathe, to be seen. The internal changes were tangible. The whistleblower line became a permanent office, staffed by real people, open-door policy included. Performance reviews now included cultural impact scores, measuring how leaders nurtured or neglected the people under them. Promotions didn't just go to the loudest or the best connected. They went to the ones who uplifted others. HR, once a fortress of paperwork and fear, became a partner. Staff actually walked in there with ideas, and walked out with action plans. And Anna, she returned. Not quietly, not apologetically. She came back as head of facilities, offered the role by Shaq himself, with Lucille's blessing. She now led a team that had been overlooked for years, and she rebuilt it with purpose, fair wages, respect, voice. She hired people who'd been passed over, promoted those who had been passed around. She made sure every floor in the building wasn't just cleaned but cared for. It was Anna who suggested the photo. She found it tucked inside a locker, the only image of Lucille during her undercover days. Uniform wrinkled, mop in hand, a half-smile caught in motion, candid, unfiltered, powerful. When she brought it to Shaq, he stared at it for a long time. She looks like she's holding more than a mop, he said. She is, Anna replied. She's holding the whole damn building. The photo was framed in black oak, hung on the main wall of the lobby, just beneath the spotlight where Shaquille's first game-worn jersey once stood alone. Now the jersey had company. Beneath Lucille's photo, a simple brass plaque read, "The soul of a company isn't found in its profits. It's found in how it treats the people who clean its floors." Employees stopped in front of it daily. Some took pictures, others just paused. For some it became a ritual, touching the edge of the frame as they walked in, like an unspoken pledge to hold the standard. The company's public image grew stronger, but this time it wasn't polished by PR teams. It was shaped by lived values. People noticed. Clients asked what had changed. Media outlets caught wind of the internal restructuring. But Lucille declined every interview request. "I didn't do this for headlines," she told Shaq. "I did this for the ones no one bothers to headline." And still the story spread not as scandal but as example. Other companies took notice. Workshops were requested. Invitations to speak came from leadership conferences, universities, even Congress. Lucille turned down most. She wasn't chasing attention. She was nurturing roots. One day, a group of interns came into her office for a mentorship session. Among them was Kayla, now hired full-time, and 3 new faces. They sat in a small circle on folding chairs, notebooks in hand, eyes wide with respect. One young man asked, "What was the moment you knew things had to change?" Lucille smiled faintly. It wasn't a moment. It was accumulation. It was every ignored voice, every forced silence, every unnecessary apology. And eventually I realized I couldn't just pray for change. I had to become it. Another intern asked, "Do you think it'll stay this way?" Lucille leaned forward. "Only if you hold the line. Culture isn't concrete. It's clay. You shape it every day by how you show up, how you speak up, how you protect each other." That became the company's new internal motto, printed not on mugs or hoodies, but on the inside of every employee handbook. Culture is clay. Shape it with care. At home, Lucille kept her journal, the one she'd used during her undercover days. She didn't write in it as much now, but on certain mornings, she'd flip through the pages and reread entries. Peterson said she's not aligned. Her numbers were clean. Anna cried. No one comforted her. I mopped while she shook. Truth moves slowly, but it moves. On the final page, in a handwriting more confident than before, she wrote, "They thought I came to clean their mess. I came to show them how to never make it again." Shaq still visited her every Sunday. They didn't talk about the company much. They talked about family, about faith, about the importance of listening when no one else is talking. He told her he was stepping back from day-to-day operations, not retiring, refocusing, coaching the next generation of leadership, creating space for new voices to rise. He asked if she wanted anything changed in the company charter. Lucille just shook her head. "It's not the paper that matters. It's the people willing to live by it." And they were. O'Neill Enterprises became known not for how it rebounded from scandal, but for how it rebuilt with intention. The bruises faded, the lessons remained, and the legacy, her legacy, was no longer whispered behind closed doors. It stood proudly, in the light, for everyone to see. Not every hero wears a cape. Some wear overalls and carry truth like a torch. If this story moved you, don't just scroll. Remember who's cleaning the room while the deals get made. Share it. Talk about it. Bring it into your workplace, your boardroom, your break room. Because real change doesn't start with noise. It starts when someone dares to listen.